Let's remind me of your notes. Balkans. The Balkans were post World War Two.
It was before. Well, he's
Okay.
actually the one who
Sorry,
officially.
no, sorry, I was looking at the Balkans. Point three.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah. Are
yeah.
we talking about modern or relatively modern Balkans, or are we talking about pre-Soviet Union, pre-1930s?
It's before the Soviet Union.
Uh,
Uh,
Bismarck Republic, Realpolitik. Yeah, Bismarck. Yeah.
and then
Mm, that's good.
now the audio
Rings
is
a
kind of
bell.
good. Yeah, now Bismarck was interesting. He was the guy who first officially unified Germany the first time.
Yeah, yeah. He sort of created modern Germany. If you ignore the Soviet Union point, yeah, it's created what is now modern Germany. You
So
know,
I, I checked all the audio. It looks pretty good. I
oh,
gotta go.
thank you. Such as
Got
Asia.
gotta go with.
Yeah,
I'm gonna set. I gotta make sure that the stream is on the playlist and stuff. And after that, should be set up and ready to go. Yeah, if you ever notice, man, I mean, nobody ever talks about Bismarck ever. And
mm, I don't
he's,
know. I've heard some YouTube talks on Bismarck, but yeah, but I'm not the regular person.
oh yeah, you get into all that freaky deaky stuff.
Mm. Russo-Turkish War. I told you that my old man is a model painter. You know, military, 2 mil, 3 mil models from mainly 17th, 18th, 19th century.
That's cool.
Um, he's got some really good books on the Russo-Turkish War, mainly from a uniform perspective.
Mm.
Also,
Some,
I hear some interesting history in that. Well,
some interesting stuff, man. Everything I've been going over here has been pretty good, so I really do like it. Well, I
uh,
mean, not really like it because it's not really positive stuff, you know what I mean? But at the same time, it's interesting. So, okay, I got everything set up. It looks like the audio is working. I have YouTube set up with the playlist and the thumbnail. I better check D Live, make sure. Yeah, that sounds good. Everything's up. Now, after that, I guess I can do my.
how do you pronounce that first point?
Uh,
Magyarization?
you know, I
Magyarization?
Magyarization is what I've been saying.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Magyarization. It's a really, really hard word. It's like that Ravinchism. But see,
Yeah,
today Ravinchism. The reason why I keep trying to remember the name and everything is because today is where it's all going to fit into place.
mm.
Because this is where things make sense. Okay, so
So you're talking about 19th century, or yeah, 18th, 19th century Hungarian politics.
mhm,
Okay,
yeah.
that's interesting. Well,
Okay,
well, the one anyway.
okay, so I'm gonna do my editing countdown for editing, and then I'll do the introduction, and we'll get on with it. So 3, 2, 1, now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Roger's Real-Time Talkshow event. Today we are joined by Mark Edworthy, who had to go absent on us last week, which we're happy to forgive him for his misdeeds.
Thank you.
Being an Englishman and everything, we knew that it was undignified to not show up and be a part of. So I know that it had to have tore you up extremely to be here on the show.
Yeah. I counted every single minute of when I was asleep last Thursday.
Well, it was a good opportunity to for you to kind of bow out because what I did is I went ahead and I did some stuff that I knew would have probably driven you nuts. Um,
I did mention to you a couple of days, actually, day after Friday, that I listened to it.
yeah.
On the first thing to listen to it. So.
Now, we had that comment about Hegel, and that stuck in my head. You know what I mean? And
Mm.
we've been discussing romanticism, and romanticism and idealism kind of go hand in hand. They're really close, but there is a difference. You know what I mean? So when you weren't here, it gave me a chance to kind of recap some stuff and kind of
Mm.
explain the difference between romanticism and idealism. So that was one thing that I wanted to get out there, so that it kind of gave a better understanding of things that were related to like Hegel and what his philosophical beliefs were. You know, so I was able to do that, but I stopped it because this is where stuff gets really cool. I actually backed up so that we could start at this point because it's very, very important. I made some talking notes, but I know we're probably not going to get through all of it. Um, but and they aren't directly like pointed out in the talking points. They kind of go with the conversation. You know what I mean? So like the first one's going to be about Magyarization, which is a really hard word to pronounce, and uh, that's something that I've actually wanted to go over because this is real crucial when it comes to what I was talking to you about the blocks that were set up against Germany during World War II. The ones that I
Mm.
the ones that I say failed utterly, and it just kind of shows that Europe needs to get over this whole idea of setting up blocks because they don't work. You know what I mean?
Still happening. Look at the EU. You see.
We'll go through some of this
Mm.
because
Oh, yeah.
that's actually where that comes into play. And ravagin, ravaginism. I keep trying to say that word too.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
That I've been trying to keep it on the stream because that plays into what we're about to go over, as well as what you've been talking about with the Napoleonic Wars. Okay, um, this has a lot to do with it too, and it's related to that revanchism. I guess would be the best way of saying it.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's kind of like the breakdown of what everything is. So with that, I guess I could get started and see where it takes us. Sound good?
Carry on.
Okay. So while romantic nationalism began as like an inclusive cultural revival, it frequently evolved into what's referred to as ethno-nationalism. And that's something that we've discussed in previous episodes. Now, that's a belief that the state should represent and protect like a specific ethnic group above all the others. Okay. Now, the romantic ideal of cultural uniqueness combined with idealist visions of the state as like the embodiment of a people's moral will. That's what made ethno-nationalism or the transformation into ethno-nationalism possible. Okay. Now, the thing of it is like during the late 19th century, uh, ethno-nationalist policies were saw all over Europe. They started emerging all across Europe. Um, Now, I have made some examples of those, uh, or made some examples, I should say, of what that would be. So, if you don't have anything to say, I'll, I'll go ahead and list this
Yeah,
stuff.
I can see some of your list there. Yeah,
Okay, now the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That's what we were just talking about with the Magyarization policies. Now, what they sought to do, they sought to promote like the Hungarian language and their culture over all the other ones. Now, this is in an area that's like really. They had tons and tons of different ethnic groups that were inside of that area, and that caused a lot of stress and a lot of problems during that time period. Now, that leads us into the Russian Empire with Russification. Now, have you ever heard of Russification before? Or Russification?
um, possibly.
Okay,
Possibly.
so now the Russian Empire, in their Russification, it aimed to assimilate minority populations. And when they did that, that often was at the expense of these ethnic groups' native languages and their traditions. Um, Now, that was one example right there. And what when it comes to Pan-Slavism, this is where Pan Russian came into play because they ended up claiming that they were the protectors of the Slavic people. You know what I mean? And that allowed them to kind of annex that whole area because they were at conflict with the Ottoman Empire during that time period. You know what I mean? So it kind of gave them a domain because they proclaimed themselves the protectors of the Slavs, and that's where all of that ended up coming into play. Now, when all of this was going on, you also have to keep in mind as well the realists. The realists were attacking a lot of the idealist uh, stories that were coming out about heroism and folklore and legends and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So that caused friction on top of the fact that, like we were saying in the last episodes about pogroms, you know, on top of the fact that people were being murdered basically because of these ethno-nationalist belief systems that were taking root. You know what I mean? So you had a lot of things that were going on in this region. Now, after that, another area to look at is when it comes to the newly unified Germany and Italy, um, which was happening during that time. Um, Political leaders were emphasizing like what do they call that? Cultural homogeneity, I guess is the way you say
Yeah.
it.
Um,
And they,
yeah.
yeah, and they were using it and saying that uh, it was essential. You know what I mean? To like their national strength. So you had you had ethno nationalism, which wasn't only about like cultural a simulation. Uh, it could also be justify. It could also justify like the exclusion and like the persecution of minority groups, which was actually taking place. Right now, I've been focusing more on Eastern Europe, but later on, if you want, we could go over some stuff that did happen in France. You know what I mean? Because um, you had quite a bit that was going on there as well, um, that we could get into. But like I said,
Yeah,
there's
it's well, early, very early 20th century,
it
or
would be yeah it,
900,
yeah it would
yeah,
be late night.
18th century, 1880.
It'd be late 19th century, early 20th century. Yeah.
So yeah. When Bismarck did find Germany or
Mm.
unified Germany, so 1870 onwards.
Right.
Uh,
So yeah, that that that's uh, that's something that we could go over. Now with this area though, that's in Eastern Europe, which is usually the German areas and the Hungarian areas. Um, this is this is where the pogroms that we were talking about against the Jews came from in the Russian Empire, and that happened during the 19th and early 20th centuries, like you said. And then there
Lots
was
Russian Jews and Russians and various ethnic groups. There have been issues since what the Middle Ages. So
since their exile from the Middle East, actually,
yeah,
it keeps happening over and over again. But
so
right here in this area, it's not just the Jews; it was also the Roma people that they were
mm,
doing this to, and it didn't just pertain to just them because and let me also point out this isn't just the German people that this was happening to, um, that was doing this. Uh, this actually was happening in areas that were occupied occupied by Hungary. And at this point in history, Austria-Hungary or the Austrian-Hungary Empire wasn't even unified with Germany. You know what I mean? So these pogroms weren't just being played out by Germans; they were also being played out by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire as well as the Russians. You know what I mean? Um, so that's something that's very important to understand right there. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people.
uh, our schools are going to the Ottoman Empire still exists up to what 1918. So yeah,
Mhm.
the Ottoman Empire had a lot of interest.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Now, the thing about it is what I was getting ready to say is like it was more about excluding minority groups from the greater uh, national movement. You know what I mean? Because they wanted to single out people who didn't want to assimilate into their form of government, basically, or their ideas. You know what I mean? So it wasn't just the Roma, and it wasn't just the Jews. It was anybody who did not fit in and did not assimilate. I
I don't
just
know. Russia has always had this sort of background of serfs or peasants and very feudal system, isn't it?
mhm. what
With the idea, yeah.
what's her name on D Live? I keep forgetting her name. She's got that Russian name. Um,
Oh, so, so
so she was talking about her history and like they were a bunch of Russians who were real passive. You know what I mean? They didn't believe in war and they refused to be a part of uh, of the military,
mhm.
and they were basically chased out of Russia, and they ended up having to go to Canada, I believe, is what it was. So
Um,
I found that see, and there's a lot of different ethnic groups that had to go through a lot of that stuff. So
well,
it's
Russia is a big country,
yeah.
fancy continent. So yeah, um,
Well, the big deal is the Tsar wanted to set up a system to where he could unify Russia into uh, one one national uh, following. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Svetlana, that's her name. She was
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Svetlana. She was the one who mentioned that stuff. So, which I'm glad I actually went on because I just found out that D Live went off the air. And I keep having these issues take place when it comes to D Live. It just annoys the hell out of me. Like there is no reason whatsoever for D Live not to be going right now. It did 12 minutes and it stopped. But yeah,
Okay. Oh, well,
that was basically what happened there. Now, the when it comes to the newly unified Germany and Italy, that's going to be something that comes up too, which we can go through. And you know, I wanted to mention that this is what actually was causing a lot of the things that led up to pogroms during that time period. And now, during that time period, a lot of these actions were pretty much rationalized as defending the authentic nation from elements that they perceived as alien or harmful. You know what I mean? And this was all a part of ethno-nationalist movements. They that's how they perceive these people as being alien or harmful to elements. They need to be eradicated. Um, now, the the critical aspects of political
but
nationalism. Huh?
I was just going to say, I think the better word would be removed than eradicated.
Well, at first maybe removed, but I don't know. There's a lot of evidence proving that there was a lot more of the violence happening, or there was just as much, maybe not on the large scale like with World War II, but these pogroms were pretty serious. I mean,
Mm, mm,
people were just murdered without any kind of remorse. You know what I'm saying? They would go into these communities and just line them up and murder them. So, this was this always occurred. Like this wasn't just some occasional thing that happened every 10, 15 years. Like they were doing this on a regular basis. I don't think they would ever really be able to find the actual numbers of how many people were killed during that
mm.
time. So, um, no, like I said, that a lot of these actions were rationalized that way. Okay. Um, now, uh, one crucial aspect of political nationalism during that time was the construction and the use of national myths. Um, now, you had both leaders and intellectuals uh, who often like selected particularly historical events like battles or heroes, to symbolize like the nation's character and their destiny. Um, these myths, they weren't always accurate historically either. Um, they were narratives usually that were designed to like inspire loyalty and justify political goals, things of that nature. In the Balkans, for example, uh, they had the memory of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah, actually, I have done some research on that one, many, many years ago.
Well, this became like a central symbol for Serbian national identity,
Mm.
basically. Um, Now, in Poland, uh, there was also the partitions of the 18th century, and they were framed as like martyrdom that proved the nationals' resilience and shit like that. You know what I mean? Now, these narratives were usually taught in schools. They were celebrated in public ceremonies, and they were used basically to mobilize public opinion. Uh, and usually that was during times of crisis that they used them, to kind of rally the people. Um, and the, the the thing that I find about it basically when it comes to this is like these were becoming like political utilities for the myths were, you know what I mean, and
Mhm.
what they were used because they well basically they had the ability to like uh, that like what we're discussing here is very complex history, okay, and it helped them to simplify a lot of historical events that were very complex to the average person. Um, and they made them very emotionally powerful. You know what I mean? So, like when when you read a lot of this text, it kind of creates this boiling in your blood, making you feel like really, really intense. You know what I'm saying? And that's what this stuff is supposed to do. It's supposed to produce that sensation within you, and that's what I was telling Mr. Robot when I was having a conversation with him. Um, and that's what these myths actually did. They created that that sense of um, power. You know what I mean? That powerful emotional story that just caused your blood to boil and gave you all that intensive feelings of what I mean superiority and shit like that. You know what I mean? So that's what I personally feel about that
Mm. No,
because
yeah, I agree. I can see your point.
well, I mean, it gave you like a shared sense of purpose too. You know what I mean? And it made these people have that feeling of unity. But at the same time, it also reinforced divisions. Uh, and it caused problems with neighboring people,
And
especially.
Hans's purpose.
Mhm. Well, historical events too. Okay, you got to remember that the same historical events were seen differently from different people. You know what I mean? So whenever these people took these stories and they made them, um, powerful and really strong for those people, you had another group of people who were just next to them who said, "Hold on, man, that's not how it happened." So all of a sudden, freaking that causes uh, uh, division. You know what I mean? So that that will cause opposition, basically. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. It would cause opposition there again. Will the opposition be effective? Will it be stamped out?
Well, it comes down to idealism. That's what you weren't here for last week. Um, Now, these governments or these countries, the political part, they understood that they could use idealists as tools. Basically, idealism could be used as a political tool. It was also good for their philosophical beliefs and stuff of that nature. So they ended up using it as a weapon. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So, to where they could perpetuate their own beliefs and their own causes. That's pretty much what I was covering last week, which I guess that's important to mention to you, so that you can kind of give me your take on that.
Um, not sure where I would go with that. Apart from what you've already said.
Now, basically, what I'm saying is like the philosophical underpinnings of idealism. It had like a direct impact on how nationalist movements understood the role of the state, basically. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So if the state was the manifestation of the nation's moral will, then strengthening the state to these people wasn't just a matter of policy, it was also a moral duty. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um,
As we saw in World War One, especially all those Kitchener um, and in the US Uncle Sam posters.
yep, exactly.
Mm.
Now, not only that, but like this kind of view, it also justified like internal reforms, and usually they were aimed at consolidating power and external policies that aimed at like expanding influence. You know what I mean? And that's where you get into Bismarck's Realpolitik in Germany. You know what I mean? And before I even get into him, I want to also point out to people who are listening, and I don't know if you're aware of it, but Bismarck, he was very pragmatic, uh, okay, especially in execution. He was very uh, he was very much into like into this ideological justification. You know what I mean? He really got into that. Um, Now there was a few other things that he was involved in, but when it comes to what we're talking about here, he was very pragmatic about this stuff. Um, Now what happened was is he ended up unifying Germany under Prussian leadership, and that was framed as fulfilling the German nation's historical mission, basically. And he pushed that. You know what I mean? So that's where we start getting into Bismarck and everything about the Realpolitik in Germany. Now you were talking about that earlier. Um, is there anything that you want to say about that you know about?
Uh, you continue.
Okay.
Mm.
Now I've mentioned it before. I mentioned it at the end of the last stream that I did about Bismarck, but I'm going to say it again. When people talk about Germany, you'll hear them talk about the Nazis. You'll hear them talk about World War One. You'll hear them talking about and I'm guilty of it too, the Weimar Republic. But they never talk about like Bismarck. And the first time that Germany was actually unified. Before that, it was just a series of city states that were kind of loosely affiliated. You know what I mean? But Bismarck was.
very, very loosely. At one point, what there was something like 150 different provinces.
Mhm. And he's the one who actually um, unified it for the very first time. And this was the first time. No, most of the people, when they think of unified Germany, they think of after the wall fell, but this is the actual first time. Um, Now, similarly, you had the Italians, Italian leaders like Cavour. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, Cavour.
And so,
He used both diplomacy and war in order to bring about unification. Uh, he portrayed the process as the realization of Italy's rightful place among nations. You know what I mean? So he was playing the whole game too. Now in Russia, the autocracy it embraced like a form of state idealism that linked the czar's authority to the preservation of the Russian people's spiritual and cultural essence. So this allowed the regime at the time to present its policies, whether domestic centralization or foreign intervention, as like morally necessary for the protection and advancement of the nation. So you had all of that going on. That that brings us into the fusion of romanticism and idealism, as well as nationalism. Okay, now this became a real potent political force, and I think that's where things started changing. It's where all of a sudden uh, they became fused together. You know what I mean? Um, it was very volatile, basically, is what I'm saying. Because what it is like the power. It lays in like the emotional appeal, and also like if you if you want the ability to mobilize like large populations, uh, especially towards like a collective action, then this is the way that you did it. You know what I mean? So its danger basically lays in the same qualities that once defined how nations became exclusive. It justified suppression uh, and expulsion, like you said. You know what I mean? If people were outsiders, they didn't belong. They needed to go. You know. So by the turn of the 20th century, nationalistic rhetoric was increasingly intertwined with notions of ethnic purity. This is where we get into ethnic purity. Now, the shift was accelerated by the rise of racial theories that claimed scientific legitimacy, providing like a pseudo rational basis for policies of exclusion. In multi ethnical regions like the Balkans, this contributed to cycles of violence and reprisal that destabilized entire states. This also is where the pogroms started escalating to, and it started getting out of hand, and eventually it would lead into what we would call Nazi Germany today. You know what I mean? And that's where I also wanted to point out that this stuff See, this stuff didn't just happen in Germany with World War II. Like, we didn't get this horrible, evil man named Adolf Hitler who came and spoke all of these words that was never heard before, and everybody just decided to do it. You know, that this was stuff that was going on for years and years beforehand, and he caught on to it and used it to his advantage. How say you, Mr. Edward?
Yeah, it didn't happen just because a little failed artist from Austria that liked cream cakes wanted to rule the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing that I think a lot of people have a hard time with. Now, the one thing I do want to figure out though, what was the rivalry between Hitler and and oh God, now I'm having a brain fart. Winston Churchill. That's something that still to this day kind of, well, Winston Churchill, I don't think it was really towards Hitler more than in what it was towards Germany. You know what I mean? But for some,
Well, it's like, Churchill had a long established military career. He fought in the Boer War, didn't
mhm. Yeah, but what
he?
would you can't tell me he did not have like a hardcore resentment for the Germans. Like there
I'm
was
not sure. I've never seen any sort of concrete evidence on that.
he actually gave a speech saying that it didn't matter if it was Adolf Hitler or somebody else. It was going to happen. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, it was just, and if you really check into him, you'll find out that there were a lot of little comments that he made that kind of gave you the idea that
During Churchill's time, did he ever fight against the Germans?
I believe he did in World War One.
Okay,
He was a soldier
gotcha.
in World War
Yeah.
One. So now, by the turn of the 20th century, like I said, nationalist rhetoric was increasingly intertwined with notions of ethnic purity. Um, and this shift was accelerated by the rise of racial theories, scientific legitimacy like eugenics. Eugenics was very, very notorious for that. I did a stream here recently when it comes to that, and there
Eugenics was studied by a lot of countries, including the UK and the US.
exactly.
Um, what's that 1930s film? Keep proper reference to it somewhere. Um, Tomorrow's Children, a film that was made in the US in the 1930s, about the sterilization of people that courts or women that courts decided weren't unfit to be born. And I can't remember the name of the video. Tomorrow's Children.
See now you're getting all excited and your mic's messing up.
Okay. Yeah, it just reminds me of the US. There was a US film that was produced in 1934 called Tomorrow's Children, which looked at the issue, which was more prevalent in the US at the time, about having courts decide on who can give birth or not.
Yeah, and that's where you get selected breeding is what it was. They believed that you could create the pure race if you did selective breeding with women,
Mm.
like you would with like animals. You know what I'm saying? They
Comes out of the Darwinist argument.
Mhm. Well, I've got to check into it, but I believe they said that his brother was really the one who pushed the eugenic side of it. Um,
Yeah, I've heard a theory on that one.
but I'm not too sure on how much truth that is, to be honest. So I don't really want to get into that on here because we are trying to stick to facts. Because I know how you get mad when I start using conjecture. You say, Roger, stop being so full of conjecture.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Now, in the early 1900s, the competing nationalism of Europe, uh, many rooted in like the romantic idealistic traditions, or the idealist traditions, they'd become entangled in the alliance system and imperial rivalries. Uh, that can be seen in the Balkans. You have the Siberian or Serbian nationalism. That was
Mm.
influenced by Pan-Slavism, and it was supported by Russia. Uh, that clashed with the Austro-Hungarian ambitions. Um, Now, with that, that's where we get into the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914, and that was the spark for, I believe, World War One, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. That's the public. Yeah.
But see, like the thing that a lot of people don't understand though is like the underlying fuel was actually like decades of nationalist agitation. Um, that was filled with a whole bunch of historical myth making. And not only that, but like political maneuvering that was rooted in like 19th century convergences of like ideology and romanticism. You know, where they were really taking a hold. And people today, whenever I hear them talking about ideology this and ideology that, and they don't understand how dangerous ideologies are. You know what I mean? They really have no clue. Your ideology.
How, how dangerous ideologies can be.
Well, yeah, exactly. If they're pushed to the proper
Mm.
limits to where, somebody wants to manipulate it politically and create an agenda that isn't good whatsoever, then we could have mass genocides like we had in the good old days back in World War II. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, or it's just we don't even have to take it that far. We're just talking about Serbia. You know what I mean? Let's look at Serbia. That happened what back in the 80s, early 90s.
Uh, we're talking about after the Cold War.
Yeah,
And so we're talking about
the 90s.
95, 96, 97.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that that's actually pretty well for us. It's actually new. For a lot of these younger ones, that's like way back in the olden days, the horse and buggy days. You know, but it's really
Uh, didn't I point out a few countries that are, well, allegedly committing genocide at this present moment to you just a couple of days ago?
yeah.
Actually, the thread
Well,
that started last Wednesday.
actually, that could have been Mr. Robot. You guys were getting into a pretty big rant. Just so people,
Yeah,
just so people know before you start talking about that, I want to let people know if they're listening to our stream, you need to come to our Element Matrix chat room if you want to get into some cool conversations because these two are wild, man. Him and Mr. Robot just go on for hours and hours, back and forth, back and forth. So,
You can be just as bad.
well, yeah, whenever I wake up enough to actually read through it, and then by the time I get there, there's like a whole freaking list of stuff that I have to read to catch up. So, yeah, you're right. So, where were we? We were talking about the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, which was the spark for the First World War. And this, like I said, was fueled by like decades of nationalist agitations, um, historical myth making, political maneuvering. And this all had to do with the convergence of idealism and romanticism. Um, now, in the early 19th century, uh, Germany wasn't uh, it wasn't a single state. Okay, and this is where we were talking about where they were like separate city states. It was like a patchwork um, of I guess it would be more than 3 dozen independent kingdoms is what they said in what I found.
I don't know. Throughout the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, it was jumping around all over the place of Germany.
Mhm. Well, I know
Um,
they called them kingdoms, duchies, and city states.
yeah.
And they were usually linked loosely. Now, during that time period, they called it the German Confederation, I believe is what they referred to it as.
Yeah.
Now, this is where we get into what you keep talking about when you keep talking about the Napoleonic Wars, okay, and how that contributed to a lot of this stuff. Now, when it comes to Germany, the Napoleonic Wars, uh, it both humiliated and it inspired the German people. You know what I mean? Now, uh, when it comes to French occupation of Germany, I always mention the Weimar Republic, and I keep forgetting the fact that freaking they actually occupied Berlin during the Napoleonic Wars too. You know, so that's where the revanchism comes into play. You know what I mean? Because they had that sense of humiliation. You know what I mean? But not only did they have that humiliation, but they were also inspired. The German people were. You know what I mean? Um, Now, while Napoleon's occupation it did dismantle the Holy Roman Empire, um, it also exposed the Germans to the idea of like political reform and unity and stuff of that nature. Um, Now, the Romantic idealist current, um, fueled by thinkers like Fichte or Fichte, uh, I always call them Fichte. Have you ever heard of them? And cultural figures like the Brothers Grimm. I know you've heard of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, they began to frame the German speaking people as like heirs to a shared historical mission, basically.
Also, didn't Vivaldi do this within a lot of his operas?
He could have been. There were
Yeah,
tons of
Vivaldi.
them. There were tons of them that actually did it. Like it was a big movement. But the thing you got to understand too is like this nationalism was more cultural, more than what it was political. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, During this time, universities became hotbeds for nationalist sentiment. Um, they had student groups. Um, I think they had one called the Burschenschaften, and
Okay.
it organized rallies that celebrated German history and language. Um, but then at the same time, while I did that, it would also condemn foreign domination.
Actually, I wasn't for Vivaldi, sorry. I was thinking of Wagner.
Wagner.
Yeah, that made more sense.
Mhm. So you had that going on in universities, okay? But the, the 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 thing about Europe though during that time is it was actually dominated by like conservative monarchies. You know what I mean?
Mm.
After the Congress of Vienna, which was in like 1815. Now these nationalist aspirations, um, they were very carefully monitored, and a lot of these countries suppressed it. You know what I mean? So this is where I start talking about the Carlsbad Decrees in 1890, 19, for example, where a lot of these movements were cracked down on these nationalist student movements, basically.
Mm.
They also censored the press, and they strengthened state surveillance in the German Confederation. Uh, that eventually led to the revolution in 1848, and that's where it became a turning point. Uh, Across Europe, liberal and nationalist uprisings erupted. And in the German states, there was a serious push for like unification under like a constitutional framework. You had the Frankfurt Parliament that was assembled, uh, and that had the aim of creating a united German national state. Um, but the only problem with that was they had internal divisions, and that was usually over whether to include Austria or exclude it. And resistance from the conservative monarchy eventually was what doomed the project because King Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia. Now he rejected the offered crown, like how they wanted to do in England, and the reason why he did that, he 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 rejected that crown from the unified Germany, was because he said that he wouldn't take a crown from the gutter. You know what I mean? Meaning that offered by revolutionaries rather than bestowed by divine right, basically. You know what I mean? So, what do you think about that? Do you think that England was bestowed, your royals were bestowed your crown by the gutter?
Um, Isn't a argument to say Richard? No, Richard the Third. Henry? Fifth?
Henry Henry VIII, maybe.
No. Um, who was the bastard king?
Oh,
Richard the Third.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've
there's an
never.
argument. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Frederick William the Fourth of Prussia, he rejected the crown that was offered to him by unified Germany
Hmm.
because he felt that the crown was from the gutter. He rather than being handed to him by divine right, uh, it was handed to him by revolutionaries, and he didn't see it as befitting. So The failure of 1848 that actually taught nationalist leaders that unification couldn't be achieved through idealistic assemblies alone. Um, it it required power politics. This is where we say enter Otto von Bismarck. Okay, and Realpolitik. This is good stuff. This is where things start making sense, especially when it comes to what we today call socialism. Okay, this guy probably did something that not even England did. Actually, England probably by the time they started really getting a firm handle on their socialist programs took note from this guy because of the things that he did. Um, his Realpolitik approach, which was in the 1860s and the 1870s, it brought unification through a series of calculated wars. This man didn't just go to war; he calculated them. Okay, like he said that we're going to go to war with these people, we're going to go to war with these people, and he calculated what the effects were going to be so that he could unify Germany. First of all, okay. Um, First, you had the Danish War of 1864, I believe, which secured Schleswig and Holstein. The Austro-Prussian War of 1866, it excluded Austria from German affairs. And then you had the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, which rallied the southern German states to join Prussia against their common enemy, basically. Now, Bismarck's unification campaign was cloaked in nationalist rhetoric, but driven by pragmatic statecraft. Okay, now that's the most amazing part about this stuff. Um, he was very pragmatic when it came to doing this stuff and using statecraft. And here in a little bit, I'll go over that. Whenever it comes to what he actually did when it came to actual government. Um, Now, once the German Empire was proclaimed, which took place in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, that was in 1871. Uh, the new state adopted policies that reinforced like a shared German identity. That would include standardizing the language in schools, promoting national history, cultivating military pride. And that was basically like tools of cohesion. Now, even with that being said, the same nationalism that unified Germany also set it apart. Okay. It set it apart as a challenger to like the established European order. And that laid the groundwork for future conflicts. So when you look at that, you look at Italy's path to unification afterwards, which followed like a similar trajectory from romantic ideals to strategic politics. Did you ever get much into the unification of Italy by any chance, Mr. Edward?
Not overly. No,
And
not overly.
now, in the early 1800s, the Italian peninsula was fragmented into various kingdoms, duchies, and territories. And they were usually under foreign control, notably Austria in the north and the Bourbon monarchy, which was in the south. They had a a term. It's really hard to say in Italian. It's called the Rossigimento, but what it basically is the resurgence, and it was much like a cultural movement, the same as what it was in Germany. It was more of a cultural movement rather than a political one.
Mm.
And what that involved was like writers, poets, and historians. They would emphasize Italy's like shared Roman and Renaissance heritage. And they would always portray unification as like a restoration of past glory. So, have you ever heard of a guy called Giuseppe Mazzini?
Yeah, rings a bell.
Now, he was the ideological heart of the early movement. He founded Young Italy in 1831, and his vision was a democratic republic Italy. It was supposed to be united through the will of the people. Mazzini's rhetoric was steeped in idealistic and romantic language, which appealed to like the moral duty of Italians to liberate their homeland and shit like that. Now, his influence eventually inspired uprisings across the peninsula, uh, even though these early revolts usually failed. And that was usually due to like poor coordination, and then like you had the overwhelming military strength of these foreign powers that were in charge. Um, Now, the revolution of 1848 that saw significant uprisings in Milan, Venice, and there were other cities as well. But Austrian armies were real quick to like reassert control. Um, uh, what this basically did was it made it pretty much clear that that ideas alone couldn't overcome like really hard entrenched imperial power. You know what I mean? So the unification uh, cause then kind of shifted towards a more pragmatic leadership, kind of like it was with Bismarck. And that was under the Count Camillo di Cavour, the prime minister of Piedmont, Sardinia. Now he understood the necessity of diplomacy and alliance building. He aligned Piedmont with France during the Crimean War, which gave it a seat at the table in European affairs. Now, in 1859, he also secured French assistance against Austria in the Second Italian War of Independence, leading to the annexation of Lombardy. Uh, the momentum continued uh, uh, with revolutionary leaders like Giuseppe Garibaldi. Have you ever heard of him? Garibaldi and the Red
Yeah,
Shirts. Now
yeah,
they
yeah.
now they ended up marching north from Sicily, and they captured the kingdom of Two Sicilies, and eventually handed it over to King Victor Emmanuel II. So in 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed, though I will say that full unification didn't happen and it wouldn't be completed until 1870 with the capture of Rome. Now, the new Italian state It also faced like deep regional divides as well, um, and this had to do with the industrialized North and the rural South, which were often at odds with one another. Um, Now, national policies promoted like standard Italian in schools, centralized governance, and again, like military service, uh, and that was supposed to like foster unity and shit like that. Um, Now, like Germany, Italy's unification uh, had it basically showed how like romantic idealistic dreams uh, could be achieved through like calculated political maneuvering. Uh, but you also have to understand how fragile it is. You know what I'm saying? Um, it's really hard to say with like that. Like there's no cohesion there. You know what I'm saying? Like there's no long term cohesion there when you do that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what I see when it comes to a lot of the stuff going on today. Like you'll hear a lot of people talk a lot of this um, patriotic stuff and their ideology, kind of pushing it. And they don't understand that's not going to last. You know what I mean? It's gonna cause you might get temporary solutions, but long term it's not going to do anything. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Sort of.
You know, it's not. Basically it's the absence of long-standing cohesion. Basically, that's what, and I really don't like freaking saying government is good. That's something that you really are into, but you know what I'm saying. It's just as a government, it doesn't really make things cohesive for long-term goals. Is all I'm saying.
Mm.
And like you said too, like with Russia, you know what I mean. When it comes to Russia and their embrace on the whole romantic, idealistic nationalism, like it was pretty complicated because of its vast size, and not only the size, but let me also point out, like there was a lot of ethnic, or there is a lot of ethnic diversity in Russia. Like there everybody thinks Russian and they think like they're all like the same kind of ethnic groups, but they're not. There are a
And
lot
like
of
I said, Russia covers two continents,
mhm,
Europe and Asia. So
yeah.
obviously you can get a large, yeah.
Now the idea of a distinct Russia or Russian mission, it emerged real strong in the early 19th century. It was intertwined with the concept of orthodoxy, um, autocracy, and nationality. That was formulated under Tsar Nicholas I as the ideological triad of the empire. Now, this doctrine it cast the Russian state as both the spiritual and political guardians of the Slavic world. Pan-Slavism emerged as a powerful ideological current, which initially promoted by intellectuals who sought like cultural unity among Slavic people. Uh, and they like the idea of being under Russian protection, basically. Now, um, this vision it found a political outlet in Russia's foreign policy, particularly in the Balkans, where Orthodox Slavs lived under Ottoman rule, like you said. You know what I mean? Russia's self-proclaimed role as the protector of these populations provided moral justification for intervention, and that can be seen in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 and 78, which contributed to the independence of Serbia, Montenegro, and Romania, and the autonomy of Bulgaria as well. So you had that going on, but domestically, the same nationalist ideology was also used to promote Russification, uh, and that was an effort to assimilate non-Russian populations. That would be especially in Poland, the Baltic states, and part of the Caucasus. Uh, that would pertain to Russian language and culture that were imposed. Um, that they usually imposed them in administration, education, and religious life as well. Uh, that would always provoke resistance. I remember with when you heard the stories about Russia and the gypsies. See, that's why a lot of the gypsies, well, most of them now, have converted over to Christianity. Is because at one time they were all pagan, and they ended up having to convert over to the Christian belief, which now the majority of them do believe in the Christian faith, but it's really kind of saturated with their old ways. You know what I mean?
Mm, mm.
And that's basically what that happened. That happened because of the Russification process that took place. They were basically being imposed. That was being imposed on a lot of these ethnic groups. So the Pan-Slavism abroad and exclusive Russification at home. It kind of reflected the dual nature of maintaining tight control over its own huge, diverse empire, basically. So in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries, there was also, well, they saw the rise of anti-Semitism with pogroms targeting Jewish communities, and that would also be like discrimination against the Romans, and they also had incidents where they were um, being murdered too. Um, and this is where they started using justifications to for defending the purity of the Russian nation. Basically, you know what I mean? That's where all that basically started. And let me remind you too, like I said earlier, you know, this has nothing to do with Germany. This has to, first we were talking about the Austrian, and now we're talking about the Russians. This is where it's all going on before World War II. You know, so it was happening all over that region.
Well, before World War One, even.
Yeah, you know, that's something that I think a lot of people don't understand. You know, it's really important to kind of bring that up because this was an issue that was taking place. Now, the Balkans were perhaps the most combustible arena for romantic idealist nationalism in the late 19th and the early 20th century. The decline of the Ottoman Empire created a power vacuum that multiple national movements wanted to fill. Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Romania all pursued territory expansion under the banner of liberating their ethnic kin from Ottoman and Austro-Hungarian rule. You see, so Serbia in particular saw itself as the heart of the greater South Slavic Federation, influenced by both Romantic nationalism and Russian-backed pan-Slavism. Serbia supported uprisings in Bosnia and Macedonia. This brought it into direct conflict with Austria-Hungary, which annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina in 1908, despite its large Slavic population. Now, Balkan, Baltic nationalism, it wasn't uh, purely defensive. It was uh, it was also a form of expansionism, and it was rooted in historical claims, in the belief that uh, in like national destiny. You know what I mean? Um, that would bring you to the Balkan War, or the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 13, where you saw a lot of alliances form and dissolve as states fought both the Ottomans and each other over territory. These conflicts deepened the animosities, and they created conditions ripe for more escalation. Uh, and that's when we come to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand uh, in Sarajevo. And this was done by Gavrilo Princip. And he was a Bosnian Serb nationalist. Uh, he was this actually, just so everybody knows, was the immediate trigger for World War One. You know, and like I said before, this goes back to decades of nationalist agitation. You know, you had competing territory claims. Uh, there was great power rivalries that intertwined with a lot of this romantic slash idealistic vision of like national self determination. And self determination is something that everybody always talks about today, like it is so great. You know what I mean? And I mean, when you take a look at blocks, okay, and how blocks were set up, then you look at self determination and what it actually is, okay. You had these countries that set up borders for freaking this ethnic group and this ethnic group because they had the right to self determination. Okay, and they created this kind of system, and you can see it even in the Middle East after freaking the fall of the Ottoman Empire, where they started breaking up what was controlled by the Ottoman Empire into freaking this area, this country. Like now we have Iraq, we got Iran, we got freaking Saudi Arabia, and all of this was broken up where before there wasn't freaking borders. You know what I'm saying? But because they were using self determination, they were able to justify that and allow it to be done. And then we sit back now today and we wonder why we have all these problems going on in the world. You know what I mean? So I'm not a big fan of this whole self-determination thing. I think that was probably one of the biggest problems that we had, or that we have today, to be honest
But
with you.
in the opposite form, the US is a self-determining country. It's
Well, each state determined its own borders.
yeah.
You know what I
Well,
mean? It,
then
it, that's the difference between Eastern Europe, and freaking the Middle East. They didn't have the right. they didn't have a say in that. You know what I mean? These people said, "Well, you have a right to self determination, so this is your border." You know?
Some borders are natural forming borders,
Oh yeah.
mountains, rivers, seas.
Well, from Germany all the way over to Russia. Okay, how
Hmm.
many borders have been put in place since this self determination thing came into play? It's getting ridiculous now. You got countries that are the size of New York City, dude. You know what I mean?
Yeah. On the opposite side, do you want to see a situation like the EU across the world,
Yeah,
a globalist nation?
and that is actually going to be mentioned here in the future when it comes to the EU and everything, because this has to do with a lot of their crap too. Like they preach this self determination crap. It's a big,
Do they?
yeah, they
The
do.
EU is all about unification.
Well, you're see here in the United States, we've got what we call the federal government, and
Yeah,
like
the EU is a federal government in everything but name.
right, and actually it would be like a union more than it would be like a federation. You know what I'm saying? Like federal, the word federal.
There's a lot of similarities between the EU, EC, and or EU and the US.
Hmm.
There's a lot of similarities.
But yeah, that's something that I've always had an issue with when it comes to that self determination. I don't think that it actually did anything positive. What?
But the UK, a country that is um, got got total natural borders around it, being a island. The UK arguably has done well out of self determination.
No, they haven't. Dude, you guys had those borders since England was ever. Come
It
on,
depends
dude.
on which perspective you're looking at, but
Self determination was a term that was literally coined. Okay, they when they say self determination, they did it with a freaking a, a narrative, basically. I mean, you know what I mean? It was actually something that they actively did during that time period, and they referred to it as self determination.
uh,
You know, now by the mid 19th century, Europe was a continent in transition. The Napoleonic Wars had reshaped the political map, and the Congress of Vienna in 1815 had attempted to restore conservative order, and industrialization was transforming economies and societies at a pace never before seen. Now, in this shifting landscape, two powerful but very different political traditions were developing. That's realism and socialism. Now, this is where it starts getting good, okay? Because realism, in its 19th century form, especially in foreign policy, was rooted in a sober assessment of power and the limits of idealism. Now, for statesmen like Clemens von Metternich in Austria and later Otto von Bismarck in Prussia, politics uh, was not about like chasing utopian dreams, but about maintaining stability, securing the state, and navigating the balance of power among Europe's great powers. Okay. Now, realism assumed that national interests and survival were paramount. That alliances were temporary, and that morality in politics was always subordinate to the needs of the state. Now, socialism, by contrast, emerged from the pressures of industrial capitalism. Now, in the rapid growing industrial cities, workers faced long hours, unsafe conditions, and low pay, while wealth and political influence were concentrated in the hands of capitalist elites, basically. Now, the socialist critique, which was shaped by thinkers like Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, who we went over last year, Mark's favorite guy right there. Uh, they argued that capitalism inherently exploited labor, and that political and economic systems needed to be reorganized to prioritize equality and collective ownership. Now, this right here is something else I wanted to point out. This is where socialism during that time period was where they wanted to they wanted to take over everything from freaking, and they wanted to build it from the ground up on a socialist belief, on a socialist program. Basically, they didn't want anything that was capitalist to survive. It was gone. You know what I mean? And they were going to build it from the ground up. That's the one thing that I want to point out. They believed in uh, like collective ownership, basically. You know what I'm saying? Um, it was basically an idealistic project in the sense that it aimed to like restructure society on principles of like justice and cooperation and all that good stuff that you always hear. You know, um, they often envisioned it as like some international solidarity that was supposed to transcend national boundaries and shit like that. Which, don't get me wrong, I mean, this isn't the same as what I was talking about earlier when I mentioned freaking um, when I mentioned freaking self determination whatsoever. You know what I mean? This is where this is like what is it? Something without borders. What do they call that again? Doctors Without Borders and organizations like that. Today, that would be what they're talking about here when they're talking about without transcended national boundaries is basically what they're talking about right there. Now, at first glance, realism and socialism seemed diametrically opposed. Okay, uh, realism was conservative, rooted in the interest of existing states and ruling entities. Socialism was revolutionary. Uh, it sought to overturn the very structure that realism was wanting to preserve. Over time, though, the weird part is they began to intersect, not because of shared common goals, but this goes back to what I was saying about the pragmatism. Okay, um, and Germany was the first ones to implement it. It was because of pragmatic statecraft. We discussed that earlier about statecraft. Um, Now, what happened here is Otto von Bismarck. Okay, not only did he like unified Germany through freaking basically methodical freaking wars that he purposely set up so that he could unify this country. But he turned around, he did something that none of these other countries did. Um, like I said, socialism. It was basically a revolutionary thing where they wanted to overturn like the structure of all of these governments. Um, and over time, uh, it actually changed, and this happened because of Otto von Bismarck. Now he was appointed prime minister or appointed minister president of Prussia in 1862, and he embodied like 19th century realism uh, in pretty much its most like skillful form. His concept of real politics prioritized the power and security of the Prussian state above all else, using diplomacy, alliances, and war as tools to achieve long-term strategic goals. Now, like I said earlier, he through like a series of calculated conflicts, uh, the Danish War, the Austrian-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War, uh, Bismarck basically orchestrated the unification of Germany under the Prussian leadership, uh, without allowing revolutionary or liberal forces to dictate the terms. But also, I want to point that out. Now, Bismarck's Germany, it was basically a conservative monarchy headed by Kaiser Wilhelm I. But it emerged in a Europe where socialism was gaining momentum. Okay. Now, this had to do with industrialization in the new German Empire, and that was becoming rapid, and it was and pretty intense. Uh, and, it, uh, and socialism during that time had become a growing uh, working class movement, basically. Okay. Now Bismarck, he actually took notice of it, and he was worried about this stuff. And do you actually know what he did, Mark, when it came to this? How he dealt with socialism?
Uh, carry on. I'm not a clue.
This is what is so profound about it, okay? Where all of these socialist movements were wanting to freaking take over the government and freaking build it from the ground up. Bismarck freaking had to he had to bring that to an end, okay? Um, and how he did that was uh, the Social Democrat Party, the SPD. Okay, it was founded in 1875. It became a focal point for working class organizations. It advocated for expanding political rights, labor protections, and in the long term, it was supposed to be a socialist transformation of like society as a whole. Now, Bismarck saw socialism as both a political threat and as a social challenge. Okay. On the one hand, he viewed the SPD as a danger to the unity and the stability of the empire, especially given its anti-monarchist and internationalist rhetoric. On the other hand, he understood that the grievances fueling socialist support were real, and if left unaddressed, could destabilize the state. Uh, Bismarck's first response to socialism was repression. Okay, now in 1878, Following two assassination attempts on Kaiser Wilhelm I, which was carried out by individuals with no connection with the SPD, uh, but used as like its pretext, Bismarck pushed through the anti-socialist laws. Okay, now these laws banned socialist organizations, publications, meetings, and it forced the SPD to operate underground. Now, for over a decade, socialist activity was curtailed though it wasn't eliminated. Now, the SPD continued to grow in strength even though all this was going on. And what was weird about it was they were running candidates as independents and organizing through like informal networks. Now, at the same time, Bismarck embarked on a groundbreaking program during that time period, and this is where you kind of get an idea about how socialism works today. Okay, um, what he did is he created uh, uh, groundbreaking programs of social reform. Okay, not because he had embarked or embraced socialism, basically, but it was because he wanted to undermine its appeal. Does that make sense? So what he ended up doing was between 1883 and 1889. Well, basically, Germany introduced the world's first comprehensive social insurance programs. Health insurance in 1883, accidental insurance in 1884, and old age pensions in 1889. Now, these policies that they were revolutionary in scope, but they were implemented with a conservative purpose. Okay, uh, this was to bind the working class to the state and weaken the attraction of radical politics. Uh, this was the convergent point. Bismarck, the arch realist, borrowing tools from the socialist toolbox to preserve a conservative state. So basically, him being a conservative, he created these freaking socialist policies in government so that he can basically take the wind out of their freaking sails. Okay. And this is where you start, everything starts coming together. You know what I mean? To me, it does at least. And this is probably where England started adopting their ideas. This is most likely where it started happening in the United States. You can see like the transformation because it's everywhere. You know what I mean? It's really interesting how this all works out. I'm really glad that I did this year because I freaking caught this. I haven't caught it before. This is the first time I've read about Bismarck, but not like this. You know what I mean? I'm not saying he was the best man on the face of the planet, but this was a very, very, very smart move. To be honest, it really was. But I'd also like to point out that this was the precursor to World War One and World War Two. Like they did exactly the same thing when it came to the Blitzkrieg with Hitler. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like whenever he did the Blitzkrieg, it was freaking the same effect that freaking uh, Bismarck did to unify Germany. It was calculated attacks. So I found that pretty interesting. So you falling asleep yet?
um, yeah, it's just interesting to look at two sides of the history and seeing the similarities.
Well, I know that when I look at a lot of this stuff, there were. I'm really glad too that we did last year because like when we were going over the stuff that was happening with socialism in England, and then I'm looking at this and I'm kind of like taking a look at the opposite side of it more than what I am the socialist side, and I can kind of see like the blending. You know what I mean? Where a lot of this is really pretty interesting because Europe is really where a lot of the issues from what I'm finding out is have come from. I actually did a list of all the actual uh, wars that happened in the medieval time last week, I believe it was, that had an alliance of 5 countries at least. And you would be amazed with how many wars took place in Europe during the Middle Ages.
Yeah, yeah.
With
I would be surprised.
with more than
Consider,
with more than 5 countries aligning with one another. Even it's pretty amazing. Okay, so after German unification in 1871, Bismarck's focus turned to maintaining peace in Europe because he feared that any major conflict could threaten the new empire's security. Uh, his foreign policy centered on a complex system of alliance that was designed to isolate France, uh, who was still bitter over the loss of Alsace, 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 how do you say that? Alsaces in
okay.
Lorraine.
Oh, yeah, Osage. Yeah.
Uh, and to prevent war between Austria-Hungary and Russia, both of which were potential allies but also rivals in the Balkans. Now, Bismarck's diplomacy uh, kept Germany at the center of European politics without overexerting its reach. But his successors, they weren't. They were less cautious. Now, after his dismissal in 1890, Kaiser Wilhelm II abandoned Bismarck's carefully balanced system uh, to pursue a more aggressive Weltpolitik, which aimed to expand Germany's influence overseas. Now, this shift alarmed neighboring states and began to turn the German Empire into a perceived continental threat, especially in Eastern Europe. So, by the early 20th century, uh, as German power grew, countries on its eastern border, particularly those with mixed ethical ethnic populations in histories of German settlement, they began to view Berlin's influence as increasingly suspicious. Now, Austria-Hungary, a lot of people don't realize it, but they didn't like Germans. They considered Germans as nothing but greedy German bankers, and they didn't want them anywhere in their area. You know what I mean? Like you, I fell for this too, where because I've heard it. You know, Hitler was real big on wanting to unify Austria-Hungary with Germany again. You know what I mean? During the Weimar Republic, but I keep forgetting the fact that freaking Austria-Hungary didn't like Germans. They didn't want them in their region. They considered them to be like greedy freaking bankers that were wanting to come into their area and freaking uh, steal their lands and shit. You know what I mean? They were really, really against them. But I was glad that I went over this because I finally remembered that. And they were very suspicious when it came to the Germans in that region. So um, this was especially true in the lands of of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and among national movements in Central and Eastern Europe. In the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia, German influence was a deeply contentious issue. These regions had long been part of the Habsburg monarchy, but they contained large German-speaking minorities, especially in urban centers and border areas. German culture, administration, and economic dominance were often perceived by Czechs as a form of political and cultural hegemony. Now, by the late 19th century, Czech political leaders were organizing not just to promote their own national revival, but to limit German political influence. Now, this took the form of bloc politics. Okay. Now, alliances among Czech parties, even those with different political ideologies, uh, to resist German dominance in regional assemblies in the Imperial Council in Vienna were taking place. Now, these blocs, uh, they sought to push back against policies that favored the German language in administration and education, and to secure greater autonomy for the Czech lands within the empire. Now, this was considered a defensive coalition. Uh, uh, this was considered defensive coalition building, and it was a broader European context, basically. So it wasn't just like the Czechs doing it; it was all of these countries that were surrounding Germany that were creating these blocks to try to keep their influence out of their regions. You know what I'm saying? And they were actively doing it to try to suppress the German people. This was the build up to what would eventually become uh, the, I believe it's the Second War. No, the First War, maybe. The First World War.
Mm. Yeah.
So, uh, Germany's growing industrial and military power, combined with its increasingly nationalist politics, made it a potential hegemon in Central Europe. Czechs, Poles, and other national groups in the Austro-Hungarian Empire saw limiting German influence as a part of the larger struggle for self-determination. Okay, that's what self-determination basically comes down to, where they believe that freaking they can like set up these blocks and they can actually uh, curtail, I guess you could say, countries like Germany or freaking Iran. Like you guys always talk about all these great freaking restrictions that are set on Iran, and look how much that's done. You know what I mean? It doesn't work. None of this shit works, and that's another thing that I keep forgetting to mention too. It's like all these years, you know, we're supposed to have these freaking restrictions on Iran, and dude, they're still there. You know what I mean? It's just like all that, all of this self-determination shit just keeps repeating itself. They've been doing this shit forever, dude, and it has shown absolutely no results whatsoever.
I'm not sure about no results.
No,
Even Iran's example has been, should I say, stable for the last 40 odd years, 50 odd years.
well, I mean, you gotta kind of put the word stable into
Well,
context, dude. What's
in
stable
terms
to
of
us and what's stable to Iran are two different things. You know what I mean?
yeah,
You know, freaking a family with one camel is a stable freaking life, dude. It's like one somebody gets to ride the camel to town. You know what I mean? It's like they don't need no stinking garage. That. Okay, so interestingly, by the early 20th century, the socialist movement had also become like a tool for resisting German dominance as well, albeit in a different way. Now, socialist parties across Central and Eastern Europe maintained international principles, which in theory meant opposing national chauvinism from any source, which included German nationalism. Now, in practice, socialist parties in places like Czech lands uh, often found themselves in tactical alliances with nationalist groups uh, to oppose specific policies or electoral coalitions that were dominated by German parties. Uh, th- this represented like a strange echo of like the Bismarckian convergence, uh, just as the conservative realist had borrowed from socialism to secure his state. Uh, Nationalist movements were now like borrowing from socialist networks and organizational strengths to like bolster their own political struggles. Uh, this eventually would be what would bring the First World War into play. You know what I mean? The First World War basically shattered the old European order. You know what I mean? Uh, that was completely gone. Um, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire uh, was basically it was like a complex patchwork of ethnic groups, and they were held together by the Habsburg authority. Uh, they basically disintegrated, uh, and that was because of the combined uh, weight of like military defeat. You know, then you had the economic collapse. That doesn't even go into like the nationalist unrest that was going on. For the Czechs, uh, again, this was an opportunity that they had been looking for a long time. Uh, like I don't know if you've ever heard of Thomas Masaryk. Have you ever heard of him? Now,
not I don't know.
he was a guy that freaking was very and Bernays. Have you ever heard of Edward Bernays?
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, they actually kind of worked hand in hand sometimes, and they were they're the ones that were pushing for the blocks that were taking place in Europe, and when that failed and German occupation happened in the Czech regions, they fled to France. you know, uh, and that's where they started pushing their socialist, uh, their socialist propaganda. Basically, it was pretty. Yeah, that right there is something that we can get back to later on. That's more in a different area, but they were pushing for the Czech independence movement, and they were like they were always into the whole idea of cultivating Allied support during the war. They did this in France, by the way, where they fled the Czech Republic after their plans had fallen into freaking had fallen horribly. You know what I mean? Like they were direct results of this war taking place because of their actions with the bloc. Okay, they instigated the freaking war, and what did they do? They fled freaking uh, to Paris. You know, uh,
Mm.
uh, now the they cultivated the Allied support during the war. They framed the struggle not only as a fight for self determination, but as a part of the broader war against autocracy and militarism qualities they associated with both Austria Hungary and Imperial Germany. When Czechoslovakia was declared in October 1918, it was designed as a multi-ethnical democratic republic. Now, the new state incorporated not only the Czech lands of Bohemia and Moravia, but also Slovakia and Carpathian Ruthenia, regions with their own linguistics and cultural identities. Now, this created a state in which ethnic Czechs were the largest group, but substantial minorities existed, mostly notably a large and economic significant German-speaking population that was concentrated in the Sudetenland along the Hungarian, Slavic, Ruthenian, Poles, and the Jews, along with the Hungarians, Slavic, Ruthenians, Poles, and the Jews. So you had a lot of ethnic people that were there in that area. So while Czechoslovakia's founding ideas were rooted in like this liberal democracy, its leadership was shaped by the memory of political struggles under the Austrian rule, where bloc politics had been the only defensive necessity that they had. Uh, and of course, this legacy would carry over into the new republic, the new republic's domestic and foreign policy, especially in its approach to German influence. Now, the German population of Czechoslovakia, it wasn't a smaller political irrelevant group either. It numbered roughly 3 million, about a quarter of the population. They were concentrated in regions that had been economically advanced under the Austrian-Hungary, uh, under Austria-Hungary. Now, many Sudetenland Germans viewed the new state uh, with suspicion too, and they also had some that were just outright hostile. You know, they saw themselves as being transferred to Czechoslovakia rule without their consent. So that caused a lot of issues there in the region. Many Sudeten Germans viewed the new state with suspicion. Their political parties often advocated either for greater autonomy or for alignment with Austria or Germany. And this fueled fears in Prague that the German minority could become a conduit for external influence, basically. Uh, and to be honest, this wasn't paranoia without some form of precedence either, because that kind of stuff was taking place, um, especially during World War II. That became more prevalent in that area where, what was the SS, I believe, they had a lot of strong influence in that region, I believe.
Yeah.
Now, in the decades before World War One, the German-speaking communities in Bohemia and Moravia had been politically organized, economically influential. They were closely connected to Vienna and indirectly to Berlin. Now, in the early 1920s, Czechoslovakian leaders feared that Weimar Germany or a future more aggressive Germany could exploit these ties to undermine the young republic's sovereignty. In response, Czechoslovakian leaders revived and institutionalized the bloc politics strategy from the pre-war period. The Czech political spectrum was divided into multiple parties: agrarians, National Socialists, and these National Socialists, they were distinct from the German Nazi Party. They were two separate forms of National Socialists. Then you had the Social Democrats and others, but they regularly formed coalitions to ensure that German parties couldn't dominate the legislature or key regional councils. Now, this coalition building wasn't only like purely nationalist. It also had a pragmatic, realist element, which was inherited from like the late 19th century experience. So this goes back. They just keep using the same kind of politics over and over again in this region, and as time goes by, the Germans just, in my opinion, they just got smart and said, this is all we got to do, and that's how they ended up gaining power and momentum during that time period, because that's all these people were doing. They were just using these bloc politics over and over again, and it was just that they weren't actually producing anything productive. You know what I mean? Kind of what we were just talking about with Iran. You keep doing the same stuff over and over again. I mean, you're not going to get any different results from it.
Maybe.
So now Czechoslovakia's leadership understood that the unity among Czech parties, even across ideological divides, was necessary to prevent political fragmentation that could be exploited by the German minority or by external powers. Now, in this way, bloc politics served as a continuation of the realist strategy to maintain internal cohesion, to strengthen the state's position in a potentially hostile environment. The role of socialism in this framework was complex. Now, the Czechoslovakian Social Democratic Party was a major player in government coalitions, helping to craft progressive labor policies, social welfare systems, and democratic protections. This meant that, in an ironic historical twist, socialist principles were being used in alliance with nationalist goals to protect the state against German nationalist ambitions, mirroring in a different context the way Bismarck had used social reforms to protect his conservative empire against socialism. Now, Czechoslovakia's bloc politics, they weren't confined to its domestic scene either. Now, in foreign affairs, the new republic actively worked to create coalitions aimed at containing Germany and Hungarian influence. The most notable of these was the Little Entente, a military and political alliance formed in the early 1920s with Romania and Yugoslavia. Have you ever heard of that?
Sort of, yeah. I have.
Is it? What do you remember of it?
Very little. Again, I've not looked at this sort of thing in many years.
Okay, so the Little Entente was designed to preserve the post-war territorial settlements, particularly the borders defined by the Treaty of Versailles and the Treaty of Trianon. Now, for Czechoslovakia, it served multiple purposes. It deterred Hungary from attempting to recover lost territories in Slovakia, and it discouraged German revisionism in the Sudetenlands, and it provided a collective security framework in a region where the League of Nations was often seen as too weak to enforce peace. So the alliance also reflected the realistic calculations that small and medium-sized states could only resist the pressure of great powers by pooling their resources and coordinating their strategies. In this sense, Czechoslovakia's foreign policy was a direct descendant of 19th century realism, adapted to the new realities of the interwar period. So the fragile equilibrium of the 1920s began to unravel with the global economic crisis of the early 1930s. That would be the Great Depression. And that hit the industrialized Sudetenland particularly hard. And that created like fertile ground for radical politics. So as Adolf Hitler consolidated power in Germany after 1933, the Sudeten German Party, the SDP, which was led by Konrad Henlein, grew rapidly in strength, openly aligning itself with Nazi ideologies and receiving support from Berlin. Now, for Czechoslovakia, the German question now took on an existential dimension. The bloc politics strategy at home was no longer just about legislative maneuvering. It was about defending the very survival of the state. So the government increased its military preparedness. They sought stronger ties with France and the Soviet Union and tried to maintain the Little Entente, though the alliance was weakened under the external pressures. Now, this Little Entente is the exact it's the example of what I'm talking about with these block politics. Okay, and it's like I've been saying, and they still do it today. Like you said, like they really have this idea that freaking block politics works in Europe, and they keep doing this stuff over and over again. You know what I mean? They never stop. Little Entente is a perfectly good example of it. When shit hit the fan with Adolf Hitler, you know what happened to these freaking coalitions and these alliances? They just fell apart. And they repeatedly do that over and over again over there. They practice this block politics like it's actually something that works, and it doesn't. It never has. So, did I just go on a rant?
Partially.
Okay, so this was the moment when the long arc from Bismarck's conservative realism to socialist nationalist alliances to Czech bloc politics eventually reached its crisis point. Now, for decades, German power, whether in the form of Prussian Realpolitik, imperial nationalism, or economic dominance, it had been like a central challenge to Czech political strategy. Now, under Hitler, that power had returned in its most aggressive and expansionist form. And the ultimate test came basically in 1938. Hitler's demand for the Sudetenland, couched in the language of self-determination for ethnic Germans, was a direct assault on the I can't even call it Czechoslovakian. It's Czechoslovak. These days we call it Czech or Czechoslovakia. Now back then it was Czechoslovak, but it was a direct assault on their state. You know what I mean? Now the Munich Agreement, brokered by Britain, France, Italy, and Germany, without was brokered without Czechoslovakian participation, and that forced Prague to cede the territory. Now, in doing so, it dismantled the defensive bloc politics strategy that had been defined, or that had defined Czech political life for quite a few generations. Now, once the Sudetenland was annexed, Czechoslovakia's ability to resist further German aggression, it just collapsed. And in March of 1939, German forces occupied the remaining Czech lands, dissolving the republic. The convergence of realism and socialism that had once been used to preserve the state was no match for the sheer force of the Nazi expansionism. What do you think of that? See, that's my final argument against bloc politics in Europe. They're stupid. That's all I got to say is they are stupid. They repeat the same shit over and over and over again, expecting different results. That's the definition for insanity. You know that, right?
So the EU is just insane.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you didn't think we was going to be able to get through all that, did you? You said that before. I don't think we're going to be able to get through all that topic. So
Yeah.
we did it. So what's your thoughts now that I got all that done?
Just as I just said, the EU, the European Union, is a loony bin. It's an
They,
asylum.
they don't learn their lessons. You know what I'm saying? Like they're doing exactly what freaking Germany did to unify itself. Exactly. And then they turn around and they're using it now for like expanding into the entire European, all of Europe. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'm not sure about all of Europe.
Well, they would want to have all of
Well,
Europe.
they would want to, but
You know what I mean? I know they don't have all of it, but their goal, I guarantee you, is to do this all over Europe. So I
they
could
will
see.
collapse before that happens.
I guarantee you something bad is going to happen in Europe within the next maybe 10 years.
The
I,
collapse of the EU, the collapse of the European EC.
yeah. So I I think we should end this because I'm really tired. That really hurt my head just reading that stuff. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, you've covered everything you wanted to go through.
Um, well, now this opens us up to where we can get through to we can go through World War II, and because this really gets us into that area now, and
Okay.
maybe go into leading into the EU, the construction of it, because
Okay.
I think we're going to have to also mention the rebuilding of Europe and how all that fits into it too, which I think uh, that should be because this is the eighth episode. So in the next one, as long as we get to the the
About the destruction of the League of Nations and the creation of the United Nations,
yeah
that would
that
be covered in that.
yeah
In, yeah.
that would be a really good thing because that would also kind of bring out a conversation about Coolidge as well.
Mm.
Cleveland Coolidge, wasn't that the guy? He was the one that came to the United States preaching about the the League of Nations.
Yeah, I think yeah.
I think he
Was it
was,
Coolidge? Yeah, I think you're right.
or was it Cleveland? It was one of the two.
Yeah.
One of those foolish names. But yeah, I think that would actually be a good idea. You know, and get through it. But
Mm.
I I did want to get through this because this is a lot of the area that I think a lot of people are confused by when it comes to this time period. They don't really understand that there was a lot of things that were taking place, and this isn't even all of it. You know what I mean? This isn't even talking about the Dreyfus incident or anything like that. You you ever heard of the Dreyfus incident?
Rings a bell.
Well, you know the actor Dreyfus, Richard Dreyfus.
Yeah.
His grandfather was
Mm. Yeah.
actually French, and he ended up serving time in a French prison over a lot of stuff that had occurred in the past. That right there is something that I could have gone through, but we dogged the socialists of England last year, so I wanted to kind of hold off on dogging the socialists of the entire continent of Europe until we got up to the EU, because that's when I can get into my real good bad mouthing.
Okay.
But to be fair, in this year you actually dominated because you're the one that pointed out 15 freaking constitutions, dude, in France. Okay, that is like that is like the bottom of the barrel. Australia isn't even as bad as freaking France, in my opinion. Like, they've lost all credibility. They're below Canada.
Okay.
Seriously. Like, you realize how bad that is, don't you? Like
Probably not.
15 constitutions.
Mm. A lot has happened in France in the last 200, 300 years.
We've only had one. How many have
Right?
you had? How many constitutions have you guys had? One? You didn't.
Since since year 1000, I don't know. Oh. As a country,
Well,
and
no,
define,
well,
yeah,
no.
define what is England.
You can't include Magna Carta. I keep hearing you guys. You actually have an invisible constitution. That's what you guys call
It's
it.
not invisible. It's not invisible. You can read the individual documents.
Well, you know what that means, though. It's not like set in stone. It's not
Yeah, it's not
codified.
codified. It's set in sort of set in stone.
Well, not really. You know what I'm saying? Like, you guys have it as like a understanding that these are our rights, and that's about it. You know what I mean? But you haven't changed them, have you? Like, you guys haven't like literally changed your entire constitution 15 times.
No, because like you said, we haven't got a codified single constitution.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting by itself. I'm glad that I learned that, because that just blew me out of the water when I found out that, because I knew you guys had the invisible school, and now you have the invisible constitution.
Like I said, each individual piece of paper can be read, can be
Mm-hmm.
accessed.
Through the internet. You can access it through the
Yeah.
internet. You can do it on the internet. You can go to the museums if you're in England. I believe you guys have a copy of it in the museums, don't you?
I think there's 3 copies, 2 copies of the Magna Carta that still exist.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 3. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there isn't 15 copies running around, you know. So,
But yeah, 3 copies of exactly the same text.
yeah, the same text. So I think we've done good. I had to go in and ban a comment that was on Kick for trying to get me to buy.
Yeah, they still that.
Yeah, we were able to get through all of this with no problem. DLive, I don't understand why they keep messing up like that. Like, it was running. I even have Twitch still up and running. Okay, and DLive is not even doing anything. So
Hmm.
it, it just it just stopped. It decided, okay, we're not doing it no more. And I knew it was on. It just decided to stop in the middle of everything. So I'm getting so sick of DLive, to be
How many
honest with you.
views? Well, yeah, I told you about that after stream, but
Yeah, but before we go, man, go ahead and tell everybody how they can find you, Mr. Edworthy.
okay. Most obvious places are minds.com and the username Medworthy.
Excellent. I'm glad to have you back because there's nothing better than freaking torturing the hell out of you with freaking information.
Yeah.
I almost had you falling asleep there, I could tell. So,
Uh, I think I'm going to need to pour another coffee in a second.
okay. So, just letting everybody know with us, you can find us on Rumble. You can also find us on Kick as well as Twitch, sometimes on D Live. And on YouTube, you can find us, well, on YouTube and Rumble, you can find us at The Praetorian. That's the channel I got there for these two. Now on Kick, you can, and D Live, you can find me at Roger_Hanson, but at Twitch, you have to look for Infamous 1969. Uh, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. If you did, please like, subscribe, share, make comments. We'd love to hear your feedback. Just tell us hi. It doesn't even have to be about the topic. Just say hello and have a conversation with us. We're pretty pathetic that way. That's all we want is to talk. So freaking within the vacuum on Matrix. On the Matrix, he called us nerds. I posted the talking points on there, and he said nerds. So
As a compliment.
yes, it is. So with that, I am going to say thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a good day, and we are done. Talk to you later.